Okay, we are ready to begin. A couple of programming notes. When we started James, I said one of my main goals was to use James as a method on how to study and teach. So we've done some verse-by-verse study. We've also done some topical studies. And today we're going to do another type of study. Next week is the last week in this quarter. And so we're not going to be finishing James verse by verse. Today will be the last class in James because next Sunday is the 5th Sunday of the month. And I'm going to make a quick trip to Virginia. My sister is having a birthday party. She's only a few years younger than me, but somehow she's still 25. I don't know how you ladies do that. She's able to do that. So I'm going to travel over there this weekend. So Justin will be doing the class next Sunday, and he will do a one-off. I don't know what he's going to be doing yet. But turn to James chapter 3. This is where we are in the where we've gotten to verse by verse, and in an odd way, it's really a very good way to end. But before we get to the chiastic arrangement of James, turn in your booklets to page 33. One of the things that, as I said, I wanted to focus on was how to learn to teach, how to study. And James is a very good teacher. He used various methods. He based a lot of his lesson on the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plain. So he used good source material. We also looked at how he asked lots of questions. And that's a really good way of teaching also. And something else we learn right here is that he is very good at using illustrations. In fact, if you are preaching a lesson, or you could buy a book of illustrations. I've got one or two in my office. I will say Justin is really good at using illustrations in his sermons. So he's to be commended for that. For some reason, I like silly illustrations. And it's because I guess they just are easily remembered and easily come to me. But if you look in on page 33, James' teaching method, illustrations, there are 108 verses in James, excuse me, and 24 contain illustrations. Now, that's not quite 25%, but it's as close to the math that I can get, that it's around 25% or so. And I've never counted Justin's illustrations in his sermons, but I doubt that 25% of them are illustrations. But that's what James does. And illustrations are very, very memorable. It's one of the reasons why we use them. Excuse me. You know how the weather turned really cold this week and then got really hot this week? My lungs don't like that. So I apologize for any coughing that I'm about to do. So you look, for example, James chapter 1, verse 6. The one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. What sea was close to where these people lived? Yeah, Sea of Galilee. What other sea? There's actually two of them. Okay, you got the Dead Sea, Mediterranean Sea. So there's a lot of seas in that area for them to have experience. Anybody here ever been on a boat during a storm? Yeah? Anybody? Yeah. You remember it, don't you? Look at the next illustration, chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. And he's talking about flowering grass. We could just refer to that as like a flower garden, and how beautiful, that it is. Up and down the interstates, I don't know if you've noticed that they often plant wildflowers, and they are beautiful. That's the idea right there. The brother of humble circumstances is to glory in his high position, and the rich man is to glory in his humiliation, because like flowering grass, he will pass away. So when you're driving up and down the interstate and you see beautiful flowers, think, okay, they don't last. Neither do I. And so it's a good reminder. Then you have a scorching wind that withers the grass and the flower falls off. You look at chapter 1, verse 15. You've got birth, this in a negative way. You've got chapter 1, verse 17, gifts, the father of lights. You've got chapter 1, verse 18, the first fruits, referring to, we would nowadays consider it a garden, but they would consider it their lives, really. Then you have, again, planting, chapter 1, 21. Then we get to some that are far more familiar to us, and that is looking at your natural face in a mirror. Just curious, how many of you looked in a mirror this morning? Okay, everybody does. That's why this is so memorable. We all look at it. And how many of you looked at the mirror and go, ooh, no, I won't ask you to raise your hand on that one. But it's like look in the mirror, and I looked at it and I go, well, my beard needs a little bit of trimming there. And I was like, let me trim that. And then sometimes it goes, oops. And you see me come from a beard like this to a beard like this. And why? And I tell people, well, I had an oops shave. You look in the mirror and you go, that's not how I want to look. So you fix yourself a little bit. You look, chapter 1, verse 26. Bridle his tongue. Well, what animal has a bridle on it? Yeah, horses. Anybody here ride horses? You? Anybody else? No, used to. Used to. What does the bridling the horse's tongue, what's the effect of that? Because we're going to get to it in chapter 3. It controls the whole body, right? How does it do it? Yeah, you pull on the reins, and it actually hurts the horse a little bit because you're putting pressure on the tongue. Well, we've got a phrase that people use that kind of controls our tongue by putting pressure on it. And sometimes we tell people, you just really need to bridle your tongue, put a lid on it, get some tape. Y'all ever heard of the phrase, bite your tongue? When you bite your tongue, you're putting pressure. Okay, he's using a horse, bridle, the same idea. Does bride come from bridle? They have bridal showers. One of the lessons I've learned as a teacher is sometimes you just go on. And we're just going to go on. Anybody here ever literally bite your tongue to keep yourself from talking? Bite your lips? Yeah. I've done that. It's like, and you just literally bite your tongue. It keeps you from saying things that you shouldn't. You keep on going, and we got the body without the spirit is dead. We've all experienced, funerals and things like that. I just, preached a funeral on Friday, and was in the hospital room when they disconnected the machine, and stayed with the family for a little while, and then she didn't pass away immediately, and so I went ahead and left. Did not know how long it would take. But anybody here ever be in a room when somebody passed away? Yeah? Okay. I've done it once. And I learned two little lessons from it. One was, sometimes I couldn't tell because the breathing was so shallow if the person was still alive or not. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And is this it? Is this it? No, they're still alive. Well, there are some Christians like that are barely breathing. And they're almost dead spiritually. But then I made this statement one time, and whether it's profound or just a silly illustration, I asked the question, what is the difference between someone who is dead and someone who is alive? And the answer that I gave, and again, it's not a profound or complicated illustration, what is the difference between somebody who is dead and somebody who is alive? And the answer I gave was one breath. You see that one last breath. And then that's it. And for me, it had a profound impact, noticing the difference between life and death was one breath. Now, you can get involved in, okay, well, let's get him, what about, science and things like that? Isn't death really when you've got the death of the brain stem and things like that? We're just looking at it from a simple perspective of the body without the spirit and using illustrations like that. You have James chapter 3. The idea, again, a bridle against the horses. We talked about that. Stumbling in many ways. I don't know how many of you have ever stumbled and fallen. That's one of the dangers, especially as you get older, stumbling and falling. So it's a pretty common illustration. You look at ships, and how are they controlled? Yeah, a rudder, a very large ship, a ship as big as this building. It's controlled by a rudder that is far smaller than this building, obviously, the comparative size. I've never been on a ship, been on some boats, and I've controlled them also. You look at chapter 3, verse 5, or page 34 on your page, how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. California, last year, had a huge fire. Hawaii, I think last year, also had a huge fire. I don't know if there's ever been a fire in this area or not, but it doesn't take much. What now? East Tennessee? Okay. When was that? 2-3 years ago. Yeah. And it does. It can get started by just a spark. Somebody throwing down a cigarette can start a huge forest fire. The tongue can do the same thing. Somebody could say just something offhanded and it not be really that big, they didn't think, and yet that just took a life on its own and could destroy people, destroy reputations, destroy congregations. And it's just a small little comment that the tongue made. You look at the next one, James chapter 3, verse 5. This is another example of how we can learn a teaching mechanism. According to James chapter 3, verse 7, how many species of beasts and birds and reptiles and creatures of the sea have been tamed? Every kind. Now, do you think in reality, from a just literal perspective, every single species that's ever lived on this earth has been trained? Been trained. It's kind of hard to think of like blue whales, being trained. But how could James then say this if it's not literally true? Paul?
I think all animals, to some extent, train themselves.
Okay.
They find out what's good for them and what's not good for them.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
In that sense, everything's probably good.
We did Adam train all the animals. He named them all.
He named them. I think they were probably the animals pre-sin were probably different than the animals post-sin. Because in Genesis chapter 9, I think it says that the fear of man had been put into the animals. Jared, was your head raised?
Yeah, you're correct. The broader point is about the tongue. The animals are an illustration, and it's not the main point. Anybody else got a comment on it?
Trained in the traditional sense, they can still be controlled because man has dominion over all the creatures. And so,
We were given that responsibility in Genesis chapter 1.
Right.
Yeah. Daryl.
The animals are trained by what they eat. A snake knows what they eat, a cow knows what they eat. So it's like humans and everything else. Everybody, you know where you are in the procedure. You know what you can do and what you can't do. A lion can eat, kill anything, but a zebra is totally different.
Yeah.
So it's what you digest or what you take in.
John.
3:7 on the sheet says, for every species of beasts and birds and reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed. So that fits what people were saying about, in some ways, they're all tamed. I'm fine with that being literal, potentially. And has been tamed by the human race. That doesn't fit what people are saying, and I think for sure it's a good illustration of figurative language. Figurative language is common throughout the Bible.
Yep.
People like me who have an accounting background, I don't like the idea of figurative stuff. You know, I kind of despise it, you know, and we're aware of the fact that there are people that don't want to follow certain parts of the Bible that will choose to take things that are pretty much clearly literal figuratively. And so because we're alarmed at that kind of thing, I think is partly why I think, like Jared said, we jump through hoops and everything. The fact is, just because some people misuse the idea of figurative language to do what they want to do, doesn't mean we have to. And it certainly doesn't mean we need to try to take things that are clearly figurative as literal. Jesus used figurative language. Good preachers use figurative language. I include both the gentlemen in the audience today.
But he only includes us today. Ask him tomorrow.
But if I want to be unfair to Perry when he preaches, then I'll on purpose take something that could clearly be taken as figurative in what you're doing and somehow act like you meant it literally. And Perry's just so wrong, you know. It's like, give you some grace, let you teach like Jesus taught, let you teach like the whole Bible teaches, which is use figurative language to help make points. And if it's something where it's like, man, if you take what Perry says literally, it's just really bad teaching, well then I'll assume you meant it figuratively, and I'll take it figuratively. And then if I think, you know, he can mislead some people with that, sure, I might talk to you about it, but I should talk to you in a very gracious manner at that point. It's like, you know, you were making this point, and I know, from what I can tell, you meant it figuratively, but the way you did it, some people might really misinterpret that. Hey, that's fine to talk to you about that kind of thing, about how to preach it better, but I should not be taking the Bible as all literal. That's just not even close to true. And I should not be judging preachers and teachers in a harsh, critical manner by kind of accusing them of doing something that the Bible itself can't stand up to. You know, it can't stand up to, let's take this all literally. It's not literal, a lot of times. A lot of figurative, for good reason. Because that's just an effective way to teach, like you're pointing out here. It's an effective way to teach.
This is an example of hyperbole. Yes, Jesse?
Yeah, the monarch butterfly,
Uh-huh.
both identical. And one of them's poison. And the prey seems to know before it eats the wrong one, it knows which one is the one to eat. And that's the one that's not poison.
Yeah, God gave animals instincts, so God trained the animals through instinct. And then God gave dominion to mankind over the animals.
Genesis chapter 1, for us to train. And you know, when James says, you know, every species has been trained by man, that is obviously a hyperbole. And the point is, look, you are doing better, mankind's doing better at training wild animals than they are training their own tongue. And so in a way, he's using hyperbole to kind of put them down. But not just them, but he's including himself, because he says no one has tamed the tongue. And that's not it. We're better at. I'll give you, Frank, did you have something? Yeah. 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 Sometimes people, and this again is, yeah, they, you've got, maybe you've heard people say this, that pet really has their owner trained. And, that does happen. And again, it's kind of hyperbole. But, mankind has trained every animal, hyperbole, to make the point of you should have more control over yourself than you do animals. You're doing a poor job. That is his point. Hyperbole is just an effective way of teaching. Jared.
The references to nature is really interesting because we see throughout Scripture, we see this idea that God put order in this world in certain ways. That order, and sometimes it's interesting because he actually shows Christ in opposition to some of the order that he put in this world, such as the powers and principalities and things like that. But generally speaking, God established some kind of overarching set of order to everything. That's what Jesse was talking about, right? These animals knowing what kind of birds, butterflies to eat. It is outside the natural order of things. It is an affront to God to allow our tongues to not be ordered, to allow them to run loose. It kind of just breaks everything. It is worse than even just the basic order God established in this dominion here.
What's the very first example of an untrained tongue?
Adam.
The serpent. Yeah, the serpent's tongue was telling lies about God, untrained, which led to disorder and so on and so forth. Anybody else on this example? And how hyperbole is another method of teaching.
I think you're right about
You can stop right there. I think you're right. No, go ahead.
Noah.
Noah?
He didn't order the lions to build an ark and put all the animals, land animals on the ark. He ordered man. And man did it. And he got all those animals on that boat. And he was in charge, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about dominion. It's about intellect. It's about thought. We can do it with all of these. Noah can do it with all these land animals. Not every animal, right? I think it's not every species. But I think it illustrates the point. Man is in charge of so much, can do so much.
Yeah.
Look at the amazing things that you've done. And then look at yourself. And that's what he's doing, using hyperbole to teach it. Chapter 3, verse 8. But no one can tame the tongue. Connected back to verse 7. It's full of deadly poison. Well, is that literally true? No, it's not. But that's not the point. Yeah. Nobody has yet, except for Jesus. What? To the point where they never stumble? I haven't. But the fact that and this will bring up this other point, the fact that you're not perfect in something does not mean that you've not made progress. Okay. So as John is talking about, all of us here have tamed our tongue to some degree. But none of us have never stumbled at all in what they say. And, the idea of perfection is the point in James chapter 3. I know that sometimes we say things accidentally. Sometimes we let our attitude get in the way. It doesn't mean that we don't have a tamed tongue. It just means that we're not perfect. And that's something else to understand. Anybody else on on the tongue. Jared.
Two things. I have a question, which I'll get to second. First, I think it's important also to remember that this is kind of part of, James's polemic here. He is the one that's speaking. This is not, this isn't, for example, a prophet that is quoting words from God, for example. This is someone that he is telling his readers here something they needed to hear at a particular time about a particular issue. And we are obviously able to extrapolate from that, determine what applies to us, what doesn't. But he's speaking in general truisms throughout, and we know that. What I'm interested in understanding from speaking about these general truisms is, how do you see the transition from him talking about teachers and the danger of teaching to him talking about the tongue and us extracting that out into a more general application? It makes sense for us to extract that out to everything that we do with our tongue, but the origin of his discussion is in teaching. So how do you draw that line there?
With a magic marker.
Yeah.
One, the word to teach itself implies the use of the tongue. And two, when you look at how James is organized, and we're going to talk about the structure of it a little bit later on. The corresponding part chiastically to chapter 3 and verse 1 would be chapter 3 and verse 13 and 14. Who among you is wise and understanding? By his good conduct
He should show that his works are done in the gentleness that comes from wisdom. Teachers teach by their words. They also teach by their actions. Yes, Jesse?
Somebody says something wrong, in their mind, I don't think, am I right or wrong with that? Do they immediately know if they say something wrong, or sometimes it's later on?
If they're married, do they immediately know they said something wrong?
If they're not, it takes a little bit longer. No, sometimes you do. There are times you say something, boy, that was a mistake. I think that going back to what Jared is asking, the control of the tongue goes into also your wisdom, your understanding, your gentleness, because all of those are expressed by the tongue. How you teach. You want a teacher who is wise and understanding and who says things and does things in gentleness. Now, in between that, see, this is also part of, remember last week we asked the question, because you know that we will receive a stricter judgment, verse 1. And we said, who is giving that stricter judgment? And one answer was, you could say God. And that could fit within the book of James also. But there's another possibility of who is giving the stricter judgment. And that would be who? People, the congregation. And so teachers know that you're going to receive a stricter judgment from God because you have a greater responsibility. Also know that you're going to have a stricter judgment from people. From people, it might not be as just as God's. It might be more critical. Be careful how you use your tongue. Are there going to be times when you deserve to be criticized? Absolutely. Because nobody has tamed the tongue to perfection. But as you talk, be wise, be understanding, and be gentle. That's how I think it all fits in, Jared. Let Paul say something, and then you can... Mm-hmm.
they're offended extremely easily. And, I think it's a national pastime now to be offended.
And to be offended for other people.
So we need to control our own emotions as well as how we control our tongue.
We do. Jared, did you have anything? Okay. Justin? I've had one or two Christians tell me that they didn't, grow up, in the pews. And so they grew up, cussing and things like that. They said the hardest thing for them as a Christian was learning not to cuss. Now, that might not be true for everybody. And having heard that, I've been thankful when I'm using a hammer and I hit the wrong nail, that I just go, ah! It doesn't even dawn on me to cuss because of the way I was raised. And I'm thankful for that, that my tongue got trained by my parents. Look at anybody else on the tongue. Ironically, we've had a lot to say about the tongue. Yes.
Another area of scripture that goes with that very much is, it says what comes out of our mouth, whatever that is, different forms of things, but it's what's in our heart.
Yep.
It's a heart problem.
It is.
Right before it's a mouth problem.
It is.
It's connected to our ability to love people. We don't really grace to the hearers with it. Whatever, we have to be careful with all areas of life. And so what's in our heart comes out our mouth. So it's really a heart thing. It's not just holding back words, because if your heart is seething on the inside about something, you're already guilty of it.
Yep.
Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yep.
Harry, I like the Psalms 32:9, where it talks about the horse and the mule, which have no understanding, but must be controlled by the bit and bridle.
Yep. And it does. It's amazing.
How a little child, because when I was a little child, I would ride horses at my grandparents' little farm. And I could control that with just the little bridle. And here I am, 50 pounds, and the horse is not 50 pounds. But there were some times when, I remember one time, the one or two horses actually threw me also. I landed on the ground. Look at chapter 3, verse 11. Another way of teaching is, to combine questions with illustrations. Does a fountain send out from the same opening both fresh and bitter water? The obvious answer is no. Although I used to say when I preached at Caneyville, Kentucky, I said the exception to that Bible verse was a water fountain in the foyer, because you never knew what kind of water is going to be coming. Sometimes it tastes good, and sometimes it was just horrible. Can a fig tree produce olives, or vine produce figs? Can salt water produce fresh? Chapter 3, verse 12. Rhetorical questions, illustrations. Verse 18. And the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Then you go to chapter 5, verse 7, and talks about a farmer. And farmers are by, well, you could say farmers are tamed to be some of the most patient people, at least in my experience. At least they're patient with the land. They're patient with crops. And that could be a good teaching on how to be patient with others. You've got chapter 5, verses 2. Garments, moth-eaten. Gold and silver have rusted. People use that. See, the Bible is just scientifically false. Gold and silver, they don't rust. What's his point there? Is he trying to be literal? No, he's using hyperbole again. And he's just talking about how things that you put your trust in will be a witness against you and will consume your flesh like fire. And you look, and the majority of the illustrations are right here in chapter 3. Now, turn to page, in your booklet, page 4. For those of you that are visitors, I'm sorry I don't have a copy. If you want a copy of the material, just let me know and you can have mine because I've got it on my computer. Okay, as we talked about, there's different ways to organize a book, organize thoughts. And we, at the beginning, just gave some illustrations of different ways of structuring. We're really, here in Western culture, we're kind of big on, you got your intro, then you got your 3 points, and then you got your conclusion. And your body, take your 3 points, it can be climatic or anticlimactic. Anticlimactic is the opposite, obviously, climatic. Climatic is you're building upon the illustration. So you go from weaker to stronger to strongest. Anticlimactic, strongest, stronger, weaker. But that is not the only way to organize. And, of course, James wasn't an American. He wasn't European. One of the ways that they structured things was through chiasms. And that is where, if you look on this page, excuse me, what a chiasm does is it kind of folds in on itself, and the middle point is the one that receives the greatest emphasis. Okay. Now you look at James overall, as we're running out of time. James chapter 3, where we get this chiastic center. I will tell you, not everybody organized it the way that I did, but I think this is the one that makes the most sense. It is filled with illustration after illustration after illustration after illustration. It is just different. Kind of sets it apart. And so when we looked at James, we talked about one of the main things was rich versus poor, right? It's all through it. Well, now that we come to this section and we see what the center point is, it's about the tongue. Well, does that mean we've been wrong in focusing on the rich versus the poor? Not at all. Because both the rich and the poor need to control their tongue. And if you go all through the book, one of the things that I thought about doing, just sticking around to it, was look at all the things that are said, whether rightfully or wrongfully. I mean, you look at chapter 4, verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow. Then verse 15. Instead, you should say, if the Lord wills. Chapter 5 is about, asking, and asking with wrong motives. And that you've got verses 12 talks about, saying just yes, yes, no, no. And, praying is also a way to use the tongue. So when you read James, as we conclude this class, feel free to use this material to learn, how do we teach? We teach by asking questions. We teach by using illustrations. We can teach by doing it topically. We can teach by doing verse by verse, expositorily. We can also teach by having main themes, such as James did, rich and versus poor, or judgment is also through it. But we can also teach in having our ideas focused in a particular way that makes the point. And whether it be climatic or anticlimatic or chiastic, the point is you're helping them understand that this is the one point that spreads throughout your class or your topic. That's what I try to do in my sermon when I ask, what is our take-home point? Thank you all so very much. I'm sorry if you were hoping we'd get all the way through James, but again, my main point was to teach how to teach. And